Battery-powered robotic pool cleaners are by far the easiest and most convenient way to keep your pool clean. But the question is whether a $350 robot will do just as well as one that costs $1,700. Today I've got 8 of the most popular robotic cleaners on the market from Polaris, Beatbot, Aiper, Wybot, and Seauto, and I'm going to test their pool coverage, suction power, fine debris filtering, and ease of use to figure out which one is the best. And as always, there are no sponsored reviews on this channel. Starting out with pool coverage, the first vacuum we're going to test is the winner of last year's video, the Seauto Seal SE. The Seal SE has dual scrubbing brushes and a single ultrasonic sensor to give it a rudimentary understanding of its positioning in the pool. Unfortunately, Seauto recently stopped selling this excellent model on Amazon and has raised the price from $350 all the way up to $699 on their website. But I've been using this Seauto Seal SE 2 to 3 times a week in my pool for the last year, and when it was brand new, the Seauto ran for 2 hours and 31 minutes and covered around 90% of the walls and 90% of the pool floor. In 1 year and roughly 150 recharges later, the Seauto had 0 battery degradation and inexplicably ran for 11 minutes longer at 2 hours and 42 minutes and had roughly the same coverage with around 90% of the pool walls and 90% of the pool floor. As I said, Seauto has unfortunately significantly raised the price of the Seal, but they replaced it with the 2024 Seauto Crab, which costs $359 and has very similar construction with the same dual scrubbing brushes and single ultrasonic positioning sensor. Also, like the Seal, the Crab has 3 modes: full coverage, wall only, and floor only, that can be toggled between using the button on the top of the Crab. But for some reason, this feature is only available after connecting the Crab to the Unlock Seauto app instead of just coming unlocked from the factory. In full coverage mode, the Crab cleaned for 2 hours and 23 minutes, where it aggressively ramped up the walls for the first hour and then switched to floor only mode, resulting in around 80% coverage of the pool walls and 90% coverage of the pool floor, just slightly worse than the previous Seauto Seal. After that, for $529 is the Aiper Scuba S1, which has a single scrubbing brush on the front of the robot and an even more rudimentary accelerometer-based navigation system, which basically means that it knows when it's flat or tilted and whether or not it's moving, but it doesn't have any idea about the shape of the pool or where it's located. However, that didn't seem to affect the Aiper S1's cleaning ability, and despite Aiper listing the cleaning time of the Scuba S1 at 150 minutes, in full coverage mode it ended up cleaning for 57% longer than that, for a total of 3 hours and 56 minutes, focusing on the walls for the first 2.5 hours and then moving into floor only mode for the last hour and a half, resulting in about 95% coverage of the pool walls and 95% coverage of the pool floor, putting it in first place overall for coverage. After that, jumping up significantly in both size and price, is the $949 Aiper S1 Pro, which has dual scrubbing brushes, a bigger battery, an extra motor for more suction, infrared obstacle avoidance, and an extra mode that can do horizontal waterline cleaning. However, in my testing, the S1 Pro cleaned for significantly less time than the S1 at 2 hours and 47 minutes, and it cleaned the walls for the first hour and 36 minutes, where you can see it missed a large portion of the pool and spent a lot of time hung up on the stairs before switching to floor only mode for the last 40 minutes, and when it was all said and done, the S1 Pro had a pretty disappointing cleaning performance, covering about 50% of the pool walls and 80% of the pool floor. Next, right at $1,000, is the Lydsto P1 Max, which has almost the exact same design as some of the more popular corded cleaners on the market. And it has front and rear scrubbing brushes, a center brush roller, dual suction inlets, and dual filtration baskets. The P1 Max also has a tethered floating unit, which allows it to automatically dock and recharge, as well as maintain RF connectivity for the remote and Wi-Fi for app connectivity even when the robot is underwater. The Lydsto has 3 modes: full coverage, wall only, and floor only, but unfortunately the Lydsto's wall cleaning algorithm can't handle depth changes, and as a result it cleaned the exact same segment of my wall over and over for 30 minutes until it switched into floor only mode, where it did a decent job using a back and forth method, resulting in around 10% coverage of the pool walls and 80% coverage of the pool floor. And unfortunately, running the Lydsto in floor only mode increases the amount of time that it spends on the floor, but not the total coverage, which was still just around 80%. After that, for $1,039 is the Beatbot AquaSense, which is their more affordable model and has gotten less YouTube coverage than the AquaSense Pro, which had sponsored videos from Linus Tech Tips, Unbox Therapy, and a bunch of other high-profile YouTubers. The AquaSense has front and rear scrubbing brushes and an ultrasonic distance sensor that it combines with a quad-core 1.8 GHz processor to create a map of your pool for the most efficient path planning and cleaning, in theory at least. In practice, the Beatbot AquaSense seemed like it was too smart for its own good, and after what looked like a strong first 8 minutes of mapping the pool, it went into a pretty erratic floor cleaning pattern for the next 45 minutes before switching to wall cleaning mode, where it was supposed to cover the walls 2 full times, but it missed the same sections of the wall each time, resulting in pretty poor coverage of around 40% of the pool wall and 75% of the pool floor. And in some YouTube videos I've watched, the Beatbot creates a map of the pool that can be viewed in the app, and I have been able to see that when I interrupt the cleaning, but after a full cleaning in my pool, I always get the message that it's switched into deep sense mode, which doesn't show a map and, as we've seen, doesn't do a great job with coverage. I also tested the AquaSense in their new beta mode, which is supposed to increase the coverage in pools that have a large shelf area or step areas. And from what I can tell, this mode just disregards any mapping abilities and randomly cleans the pool, similar to the less expensive Seauto Crab and Aiper S1. But you can see that the results were significantly better, covering around 95% of the pool walls and 95% of the pool floor. Though I am pretty skeptical that it actually cleaned in those areas, since in this mode it completely abandons its methodical navigation system and instead it takes running leaps off the ledges to try to find new walls. Following that up, for $1,199 is another very smart robotic cleaner, the Wybot S2 Pro, which has a single scrubbing brush, infrared mapping and object avoidance, and a powered base station, which not only allows it to automatically recharge when it reaches 20% battery, but the ultrasonic remote on the base also allows you to control the Wybot S2 Pro from the Wybot's phone app, even when the robot itself is underwater. And speaking of the phone app, it has more options than I've ever seen for a pool cleaner, including 7 different pool coverage modes and 6 different wall and floor cleaning patterns to best suit your pool's shape and topography. After some experimenting with different patterns, in my testing, the Wybot S2 Pro cleaned for 3 hours and 18 minutes, covering around 80% of the pool walls and 90% of the pool floor, staying in a hybrid wall and floor cleaning mode for the entire session. But the thing that I was most impressed with was how well it did finding and returning to its dock after each cleaning session. And last, the most expensive pool vacuum in this video by a significant margin is the $1,699 Polaris Freedom Plus. And if you didn't know, Polaris is basically the biggest name in pool cleaners, and along with their sister brands Zodiac and Jandy, they produce a large majority of the pool equipment in the US. The Freedom Plus only has a single scrubbing brush in the front and a more rudimentary accelerometer-based navigation system, but it still has full coverage, floor, wall, and waterline cleaning modes, and in my testing in full coverage mode, the Freedom Plus cleaned for 2 hours and 39 minutes and covered 65% of the pool walls and 95% of the pool floor. And that means that overall there was no correlation between more advanced pool mapping systems and pool coverage, and the 2 highest coverage robots were 2 of the least expensive. But just covering the wall and floor is only half the battle. So next we're going to test pickup ability, and in my experience there are 2 main types of debris in pools. Larger neutrally buoyant debris like leaves, and fine sand and silt that settle at the bottom of the pool. Starting out with the leaves, I used submerged and waterlogged oak and crepe myrtle leaves, and I ran each pool cleaner in floor-only mode. And in this test, there wasn't a huge amount of difference between each robot, so I've grouped them into 3 categories. Starting with the below average category, the Aiper S1, Beatbot AquaSense, and Seauto Silt did a good job of collecting leaves that they directly passed over, but each of them had some issue that prevented them from collecting as much debris as they should have. The Aiper S1's rear-facing exhaust stirred up any surrounding leaves after it passed, the Seauto Silt's narrow suction channel meant it had a much smaller cleaning path, and the Beatbot AquaSense turns its suction motor on and off when it changes directions, which causes it to miss leaves and debris that it otherwise could have picked up. Next, in the average performance category, we've got the Seauto Crab, the Aiper S1 Pro, the Polaris Freedom, and the Wybot S2 Pro. And these vacuums were able to pick up any leaves that passed directly under the front of the robot, but they weren't able to pull in surrounding leaves, and they still had a relatively small cleaning path. And the best performer as far as leaf pickup, and the only one in the above average category, was the Lydsto P1 Max, which looked extremely strange bouncing along the pool floor, but you can't argue with the results. And the Lydsto did an amazing job not only picking up leaves that passed directly under the extremely wide cleaning path, but also sucking in leaves from the surrounding areas, resulting in a completely clean path around it and cleaning up nearly all the leaves in just 2 passes. Moving on to sand and silt pickup, I used a combination of medium black aquarium substrate and black sand, and I set each vacuum to floor-only mode. Starting with by far the worst performer in this test, the Beatbot AquaSense basically didn't pick up any of the sand or substrate, and in 2 separate direct passes, it barely made a dent in the pile of debris. And the Seauto Crab wasn't much better, passing directly over the same area twice and still not leaving a clean path. The Aiper S1, Polaris Freedom Plus, Seauto Silt, and Wybot S2 were all just average performers, passing over the sand and substrate pile and picking up a decent amount, but definitely not leaving a completely clean path. And the top performers by a significant margin were the Aiper S1 Pro, whose dual suction motors gave it a huge advantage picking up the heavier rocks and sand, and the Lydsto P1 Max, which picked up more sand and silt in just 2 passes than all the average and below average robots combined. However, you may have noticed that as the robots passed over the sand, most of them blew a black cloud of silt out of their exhaust ports. And that's because the mesh filter baskets on these battery-powered cleaners are not as fine as what you might find on a tethered cleaner. I used a microscope to compare the filter sizes of each cleaner, and I found found that the Beatbot AquaSense had by far the finest filter basket at 150 microns. The Wybot S2 Pro, Aiper S1 and S1 Pro, and Polaris Freedom were all using 180 micron filter baskets, and the Lydsto P1 Max, Seauto Seal, and Seauto Crab were all using 250 micron baskets. And for comparison, top-of-the-line tethered cleaners use 100 micron filters, and your pool's main cartridge filter can filter particles down to around 20 microns. A finer filter mesh will obviously filter finer particles, but those finer meshes will also get clogged much faster, and that greatly reduces the suction power, and it's probably the reason for the poor performance of the Beatbot AquaSense in both of the pickup tests. The best solution to this problem is to use a two-stage filter with a mesh filter bin first and then a finer secondary filter. And the two robots in this test that use that system are the Aiper S1 Pro, which has a pleated secondary filter, and the Wybot S2 Pro, which has an interchangeable foam filter and comes with both fine and coarse options depending on what type of debris you typically deal with. However, in practice, I found that the Aiper S1 Pro's secondary filter was mostly for show, and it still blew a significant silt cloud out of its dual exhaust ports. And the secondary filter was almost always completely clean, probably as a result of a bad seal around the filter, allowing for the water to just go around the filter instead of through it. The secondary filter on the Wybot S2 Pro, on the other hand, did a great job of collecting the finer debris, and it was filled with sand and silt after each run, without any significant reduction in suction power. And the last cleaning task we need to test is wall and waterline cleaning. To simulate floating pollen getting stuck on the walls, I smeared ground flaxseed at and above the waterline, and I set each vacuum to wall cleaning mode or waterline only cleaning mode if it was available. And in this test, the worst performer by far, coming in well below average, was the Lydsto P1 Max, which couldn't pull itself far enough out of the water to actually clean the waterline. And if you remember from the coverage map, the P1 Max also got stuck in the deep end during wall cleaning mode, so definitely cross this one off your list if waterline cleaning is important for you. Also coming in below average was the Polaris Freedom Plus, which made a very controlled effort to clean the waterline, but it only reached about half an inch above the waterline, and it didn't use enough force to dislodge any of the debris that was in the grout lines. The Wybot S2 Pro and Beatbot also used a very controlled and calculated method to clean the waterline, and did an average job, cleaning about an inch above the waterline, while the Aiper S1 just launched itself as far as it could out of the water, and it ended up cleaning the waterline just as well as the Beatbot and the Wybot. The Aiper S1 Pro and Seauto Crab were both above average, with the S1 using its horizontal waterline cleaning method, while the Crab spins its brush forward to shoot water onto the tile, resulting in clean grout lines and decent cleaning up to about 2 inches above the waterline. But the best waterline cleaner by a significant margin is the Seauto Seal, which easily catapults itself 3 inches above the waterline and violently spins its front roller forward, splashing water onto the tiles, resulting in an almost completely clean waterline after just one pass. So if we add up all those scores, the best cleaner was the Aiper S1 Pro, but the Lydsto P1 Max dominated specifically in floor cleaning with its 2 suction channels, front and rear rubber rollers, and central bristle bar. The Wybot S2 Pro was consistently good without any specific weaknesses, and the Seauto Seal was the king of waterline cleaning. So next, it's time to talk about the less obvious things that will impact your satisfaction with your pool cleaner. Starting with the weight, because most of these are supposed to come out of the pool after every clean. To test this, I submerged each cleaner and then I lifted them to just below the surface using a hook, and then I attached them to a scale. I measured the maximum weight required to lift the cleaner out of the pool, the approximate stable weight once the majority of the water had drained, and the time that it took for the water to drain. Starting with the cleaners that I think are legitimately too heavy, the Lydsto P1 Max came in at a max of 65.38 pounds and took 9 seconds to drain before stabilizing at around 34 pounds, and the Aiper S1 Pro had a max weight of 59.02 pounds and took 7 seconds to drain to a wet weight of 29 pounds, which, like I said, felt way too heavy given the awkward angle that they need to be lifted. The Beatbot AquaSense, Wybot S2 Pro, Polaris Freedom Plus, and Seauto Seal all came in around 40 pounds of initial weight, with the big difference being drain time, where the Freedom Plus uses its suction motor to drain the robot in about 3 seconds, while the Seauto takes about 5 seconds, the Wybot S2 took 6 seconds, and the Beatbot's fine filter basket slows the drainage process down to about 8 seconds. And the lightest 2 robots in this video were the Seauto Crab and the Aiper S1 at 36.15 pounds and 35.4 pounds, and both took around 5 seconds to drain to their wet weight, where the Aiper S1 was the lightest at just 17 pounds. This next section might seem trivial, but it's actually pretty important, at least to me, and that's how easy it is to clean the debris bin. And the only one that really stood out in this case was the Polaris Freedom, which uses an open top slope design that lets any debris pour out of the bin with just a quick rinse from a hose. The Beatbot also has an open top design, but I found that the fine mesh needed more than just a simple rinse to clear the filtration, and the Seauto Seal and Crab, Aiper S1 and S1 Pro, and Wybot S2 Pro all have closed basket-style debris bins that were easy enough to clean, but nowhere near as convenient as the Polaris. Another important aspect of bin design design is how well they're able to hold small, neutrally buoyant particles when removing the robots from the pool. So I put 1 tablespoon of ground flaxseed into each bin and fully submerged the cleaners. And then I videoed them from underwater while I pulled them out of the pool. And in this test, the only cleaner to not have any debris escape was the Polaris Freedom. The Seauto Crab, Aiper S1, Beatbot Aquasense, Wybot S2 Pro, and Lydsto P1 Max all had a small amount of debris escape. The Aiper S1 Pro had a moderate amount of flaxseed husk leak out, and the Seauto Seal was the worst performer in this test, which is surprising because the Seauto Crab performed pretty well. So it could be because my Seauto Seal is a year old and the rubber flap on the bin is getting worn out, or it could have something to do with this new vent hole on the Crab's bin that isn't present on the Seal. And as these robots get more high-tech, the last thing to consider are their app integrations and smart features. Starting with the Aiper S1 Pro, which has 0 app connectivity, but you can put it in eco mode where it will clean the pool floor for 45 minutes every 48 hours for a total of 3 cleans before needing to recharge. The Seauto Seal uses the Seauto app and the Crab uses the Unlock Seauto app, but neither app is particularly useful other than the Crab needing to connect that one time to enable mode selection with the onboard button, and then you're free to uninstall it after that. The Aiper S1 Pro can connect to the Aiper app, but all that does is enable an additional wall-only mode, so it's not particularly useful. The Lydsto app gives information about whether the robot is cleaning, charging, or in standby, and it does allow you to set up a simple cleaning schedule. But in all my testing, the scheduling on the Lydsto doesn't actually work from the app or from the remote. The Beatbot app allows you to create custom modes, and it's supposed to send you a notification when the robot's done cleaning. But the notifications never work for me when the robot is waiting at the waterline, and I always end up getting the notifications after I pull the robot out of the pool. Which is also the case with the Polaris Freedom, which is supposed to be able to poke itself out of the water enough to connect to Wi-Fi and then send a notification. But that hasn't ever worked for me despite having an access point right by my pool. But the Polaris does come with a useful light-based remote that can be used to drive it around the pool and call it to the surface for retrieval, which I found to be much more convenient than using a pool hook. And last, the Wybot app for the S2 Pro is the only one that actually works and does something. Not only does it allow you to start the clean and call the robot back to the charging station remotely, but it also allows for scheduling, and the scheduling works perfectly. Because the charging base sits out of the water, it's able to maintain a Wi-Fi connection, and then it communicates with the S2 Pro underwater using an ultrasonic sonar click, which I have to admit is pretty cool. So all things considered, which robot should you buy? If you add up all the scores, the overall winner is the Wybot S2 Pro, which was a consistently average cleaner with no weak areas. It had good pool coverage and good cleaning time, a good bin design with a fine particle secondary filter, and a very innovative inductive charging base that lets it run on a schedule or on demand from the app. And my only complaints about the S2 Pro, other than the $1,200 price tag, are that waves from people swimming in the pool can knock it off of its magnetic charging base, and it doesn't try to go back to its base on its own until you manually press the home button, and the mode button on the robot itself is a capacitive touch button, which doesn't work when the robot is wet, which is basically all the time. I'm also really curious about the longevity of the auto recharge system, since in my experience, leaving a pool cleaner in the water 24/7 causes it to break down much faster than it normally would. So I'm going to keep using the S2 Pro as my vacuum for the next year, and then I'll pin a comment with any updates, good or bad. If you remove the smart functionality subscore, the Aiper S1 Non-Pro actually had the exact same score as the Wybot, with better overall coverage and a longer cleaning time for half the price. And if price is a really important factor for you, then the Seauto Crab is almost as good as the S1 for $170 less. But you'll need to decide if things like live customer service and warranty support are important to you, since Seauto's phone line just automatically hangs up on you, while Aiper's is open from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Friday, and they were very helpful when I called in with a made-up warranty claim. Another interesting use of the Aiper S1 and Seauto Crab is that because they just more or less randomly clean your pool, I found that they were both pretty effective at cleaning my hot tub, while smarter path planning robots like the Wybot S2 Pro and Beatbot Aquasense were too confused by the bench layout and got stuck in the corner. And larger robots like the Lydsto P1 Max, Aiper S1 Pro, and Polaris Freedom Plus were just too big to move around in those tight spaces. Speaking of the Polaris Freedom Plus, it came in third place, and despite its very high price tag and mostly average performance, there's no question that it is the most well-built cleaner in this video from the most reputable brand, and it has the most convenience features, like the waterproof in-pool remote control, charging dock, dolly, and the perfectly designed, easy-to-clean, open-top debris basket. And if you aren't too concerned with price and you just want a top-of-the-line, bug-free, no-hassle experience, the Polaris Freedom Plus is probably the best choice. Moving on to the robots that I wouldn't recommend, the Aiper S1 Pro is a pretty good cleaner, but it is so big and heavy, and it's so much more expensive than the S1 that I don't think it's a good option. Especially since the S1 Non-Pro had a 41% longer cleaning time, despite listings to the contrary on the Aiper website. The Beatbot Aquasense was the cleaner that I was most excited for with its advanced mapping system and path planning. but unfortunately I think it is too smart for its own good. And using path planning instead of random cleaning results in the same missed areas over and over. And the continual starting and stopping of the suction motor when navigating causes it to miss debris that it otherwise would have been able to clean. The Lydsto P1 Max is an absolute floor cleaning powerhouse, and I admit being emotionally attached to its floating tether, which my family has nicknamed Ducky. But if I'm being honest, a metal contact-based charger floating in a saltwater pool is a terrible idea. And in the 4 weeks that I've been testing the Lydsto, the charging contacts have already corroded to the point where Ducky thinks he's losing connection and he tries to swim back to the charger while he's still attached. Combine that with the fact that you're supposed to drill into your patio to connect the base station and the completely ineffective wall cleaning modes, and I think most people should avoid the P1 Max despite its amazing floor cleaning abilities. And last, if you were lucky enough to pick up the original Seauto Seal SE last year for as little as $295 on Prime Day, then you definitely got away with something, because Seauto is now only selling that model through their website for $699. And it is a better cleaner overall than the new budget Crab, but it is definitely not double the price better. As always, there are no sponsored reviews on this channel, but I do have links down in the description for all the robotic pool cleaners in this video, and as always, I appreciate when you use those links, since as an Amazon affiliate, I do earn a small commission on the sale at no cost to you. I'd also like to thank all of my awesome patrons over at Patreon for their continued support of my channel, and if you're interested in supporting my channel, please check out the links down in the description. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that thumbs up button and consider subscribing. And as always, thanks for watching the hookup.